Hi, I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the Senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. Welcome to this week's edition of Kibbitzing with Kagan, where I have brief conversations with people I find fascinating. Today, my very special guest is Dan Diaz. You may know him as Brittany Maynard's husband. Dan, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today.
Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity.
Absolutely. So I did not wear waterproof mascara, but I know that there are going to be tears and challenges with this conversation. But here goes. So before we talk about right to die, end of life options, compassionate choice, whatever folks call it, which is such an important fundamental policy issue and personal issue. Let's talk a little about you, unrelated to being a husband. Where did you grow up, and how did you and Brittany meet?
Let's see. I grew up in Northern California. I went to grade school was Catholic school. I was an altar boy, the whole 9 yards. High school was Alameda High. Um, I went to college here in California, so kind of local through and through. Attended UC Berkeley. And fast forward to 2007, that's when I met Brittany.
Nice.
She had just graduated also from UC Berkeley at that time, and we started dating. Didn't take long for us to determine we were boyfriend and girlfriend and falling in love. And we lived together in San Diego and San Clemente. We were engaged in 2012. We bought this house where I'm sitting now. We got married in that year, September of 2012.
Yep.
And well, it was shortly after our wedding that Brittany started having headaches, and then that's what led to, that issue. But so that's where I'm from and a little about me.
So before we get to the sad parts, tell me what was great about Brittany. Tell me what she brought to your relationship and your marriage.
Well, and I think that the reason that her story was so compelling is just from the videos that Brittany made. It was just kind of evident. Here's this very
beautiful,
dynamic,
engaging,
adventurous individual, a person, super outgoing and friendly.
Yeah.
Just a kind, loving person. So, getting to know her and her getting to know me, it was easy. It was the conversations would flow from the first day that we met, but more importantly, and I never understood this. People say, oh, these awkward moments of silence. No, they're not awkward. That it's just, we had no problem, or we kind of relished you would just being in another person's company, just being in her company and enjoying if we're on a drive, if whatever. It was that match, it worked. So yes, Brittany was a very loving, caring person. And I think also it highlights a very determined individual, no nonsense, that was not going to put up with kind of the status quo and accepting how things might play out for her. She was one who kind of took control.
So you got married in September of 2012. Soon after, as you said, the headache started. How long? She was diagnosed in 2014. Was that, I guess,
so for that whole year,
doctor's appointments.
So in 2013, she saw a specialist, probably like May, June, and because it just got to a point where she says, okay, something's going on here. And that physician said that she was having migraines. Gave her prescription, did not order a CT scan or anything, gave her a prescription. And oddly, it kind of helped. So for the months of July, August, September, it kind of helped keep those migraines away. Unfortunately, by the end of that year, so this is now the holiday season, Thanksgiving, Christmas of 2013, the headaches were back. We had kind of written part of it off. It's like, well, maybe it was just the stress of the holidays, families around and everything, the craziness of that time of year. But it was actually New Year's Eve So December 31st, Brittany and we had gotten away for the weekend. That's how we were going to celebrate New Year's. We were in wine country in
Nice.
California, which is just about an hour and a half north of where we
Mm-hmm.
live.
Mm-hmm.
And on that day, we'd gotten lunch. We were coming back to the hotel we were staying at. Brittany starts throwing up again, and just the pain is just, too intense. And I said, sweetie, we have to go to the emergency room. And we did. And that's the first time that we discovered that brain tumor, which I'll send the image over to you if they want to include, but it was massive. And so that's when, cancer, all of a sudden, your world gets turned upside down. And now you're dealing with the chaos of cancer. And
So this
it
was,
becomes this all-consuming thing.
so the diagnosis was terminal brain cancer. And let's talk about what happened next and how you all figured out
Yeah.
the journey.
So 10 days after that, Brittany underwent an 8-hour brain surgery. So that's, you fight. When you have cancer, that's what you do. So they were able to remove only about 35% of the tumor. And there's just parts of the brain they cannot send that scalpel. And at the end of that surgery, they told Brittany that she likely had 3 to 5 years to live. So at that point, it was a grade 2 astrocytoma glioma, so considered a lower grade tumor. But still, the size of it was the concerning part. Unfortunately, just 2 months later, at the first follow-up MRI, the tumor showed signs that it was growing aggressively, indicative of a glioblastoma multiforme. So within those 2 months, the amount of tumor material that they had removed, and the surgery they deemed it as the term they used was to debulk. It was to remove the material they could safely get to in order to create enough space in her skull so that the symptoms that she was feeling, so those symptoms would subside.
Yes.
So in that case, in that sense, it worked. But within those 2 months, 20% of what they had removed had already grown back. So it was now the trajectory because of the more aggressive form. That's when they said, this does not look good. You have 6 months. Keep in mind, Brittany's only 29 years old.
Yes.
So that's then the time when Brittany and the research that she had done, she says, well, we will continue to fight, but we will wage this battle against this tumor from Oregon. Because
Yes.
at that point, Oregon had had their death with dignity law for 17 years. And so Brittany said, we'll do what we can, but we'll do it from there, because at least in Oregon, she said that she knows that she doesn't have to allow cancer to be in the driver's seat, that
Yes.
she gets to choose how her final few days on this green earth might play out.
And did you agree? Was that a hard decision?
Yeah, no, right away. It was one of those things where and this is the tough part, talking with legislators, meeting with just the general public. Look, I'll start by saying nationwide support for medical aid in dying is 72%. Support within the state of Maryland is 71%. So I'm in good company. The majority of people get this. But whenever I have this conversation, it's unfortunate that my most effective way is I got to put that person, force them to contemplate being in Brittany's shoes.
Right.
And that was the exercise that I did, that if that tumor was in my brain,
yeah,
I would have been saying the same thing to Brittany. It's like, well, we got to move to Oregon.
Yeah. So let's stay with Brittany and then shift to advocacy and what you've done since her passing. Talk about her video, talk about the national attention that her battle drew.
So we, Brittany finds a house for us to rent on Craigslist.
Mm-hmm.
We pack up half this house into a U-Haul.
Mm-hmm.
She had to find a new medical team, establish residency, we said goodbye to our friends and family. We drive up to Oregon. This is in May of that year, 2014. So we're living up there, getting the superb care at OHSU, Oregon Health and Science University, a great facility. These are, just wonderful caregivers.
Good.
Her palliative care team, the physician, Harvard trained. This is top-notch care, and yet it's just the acknowledgement that modern medicine has its limits. So we're living up there, and that video got all that attention. It was October 5th. So she makes that video, and her hope was to just bring attention, specifically amongst California legislators, um, to bring some attention to this, to help get laws passed so that nobody would ever have to do
Yes.
what we did of leaving their home after being told you have 6 months to live. So
And
that's
millions
why
of
she made the
people,
video. What's that?
millions of people watched that video right
Yeah.
away.
So
It got
when
enormous
when it
attention.
when it was released in October, yeah, and to be clear, Brittany did not set out to be the face of this movement. That's a label the media gave her. Brittany simply wanted, this was her way of providing her testimony, because she knew she wouldn't live long enough to provide testimony in person
Yeah.
after she died and once I was back in California.
Right.
So yes, on October 5th, the attention that, and this was the People magazine article. First it ran online, and then they came to that house in Portland to photograph her, and they put this issue out there, and her video's been viewed over 12 million times. She made two subsequent ones. And it just, Brittany Maynard's story was everywhere, and it very proud of her advocacy, because the impact that it had on this conversation of end of life care.
So here's
It
the
brought
thing.
people. Go
Go
ahead.
ahead, please. A
Well,
lot of
it just
people.
made people think and talk about this and not be so afraid,
Yes.
because here they are looking at a 29-year-old recognizing, oh,
Right.
wait, you don't have to be old to be in
Right.
this situation.
Right. So one of the things that I talk about all the time, and it's astonishing how people won't talk about death. And I always say, we are all going to die. The question is when, how, and whether we're ready. And it's just astonishing. And so this issue is so common sense. And for me, the right to die is another aspect of being pro-choice. It's my body. I get to decide. And so I feel really strongly about it. And I'm so grateful for your advocacy. And I'm just so sad that it came from such a personal tragedy. So November 1st of 2014 became the date that I assume Brittany chose would be her final day. And tell me,
Yeah.
to the degree that, and don't share anything you don't want to share, obviously.
No, that's fine.
Was there something important about that date? And tell us about how that went.
No, and the date is something that it's funny how many times that's come up. I mean, even when Brittany was live, Brittany set November 1st as the goal for her to try to make it to that day.
Mm.
So the discomfort that she's feeling, the pain at the base of her skull, that, pain that not even morphine can alleviate, the nausea, the vomiting, the seizures, all of this, what she's suffering through those months of August, September, October, November, it's just getting worse. So for her, the fact that she was trying to make it to November 1st was to celebrate two occasions. One was our wedding anniversary at the end of September.
Mm-hmm.
The other was my birthday, which is at the end of October.
Mm-hmm.
So she set that as a goal to say, can I make it to these days? And so she just said, well, let's see if I can live until November 1st. Well, then the media latches onto that, and they're like, oh, well, November 1st, doesn't matter how she's feeling. She's going to end her life. No. That is not at all how it went. That's what the media spun, which upset her. It's like, she's trying to live to that. For her to make it through that month of September and October, she's already dealing with things were getting bad. And, a couple of runs to the emergency room. It's not pretty.
Yeah.
And so, but it just so happened then that on November 1st, on that day, that morning, she had a seizure. And we took the dogs for a walk. For Brittany, being outdoors in nature is really what kind of that, more than any of the medications, and there was plenty that she was on, that being outdoors was kind of her elixir. That's just what brought her strength and inner peace. So when we got back, and her friends, her parents we're in the house, and Brittany said, you know, Dan, it's my time. That the seizure she had that morning was just the acknowledgement, the recognition that that if she suffers a stroke, things can go south at any moment, and then she's paralyzed. Now she's stuck in bed, trapped kind of in her own body, with not able to take the medication on her own. And Brittany's like, I would prefer to pass away gently now instead of pick a number. I last another 10 days, but I'm only going to be suffering those days. So
Yeah.
Brittany, she, you know, said, I would prefer to pass away peacefully. And so go ahead.
So let's move forward.
Mhm.
You moved back to California and you reached out to Compassionate Choices, and set up the Brittany Maynard Fund, and started your advocacy. Brittany had asked you to promise to do advocacy. Talk through that and how
Sure.
challenging a decision was that for you?
Well, so one thing actually, Brittany made that video in July. It got the attention it did in October because within that time frame, like in August, that's when actually she had reached out. We together reached out to Compassion Choices.
Okay.
So they played Compassion Choices, who I continue to still work alongside.
Yes.
Played a big role in getting. They hosted it on their website, crashed their website, the video. The story, people picked it up, and then that's when all the attention. So by the time I got back to, after Brittany died, I moved back to California. And then yes, the conversations that we had was, would I be willing to help pass laws in more states so that nobody would have to leave their home. So California, our home state, was the first one. We introduced legislation January. So Brittany had just died 2 months before. We introduced legislation January of 2015, and worked on getting it through the Senate, through the Assembly. Governor Jerry Brown signed that bill October of that year. So and we had tried in California. It had been tried before. For 18 years, they've been trying to pass this, maybe even longer.
Mm.
And I think, you know, in some large degree, because of Brittany's story, we knocked it out in 9 months.
Amazing. So you have visited 18 states, and you are the face of Compassion and Choices. And
Well,
so
maybe Brittany is the face of this. I'm the messenger.
Okay,
I
fair.
share her story, but yes, Brittany is the one that still people remember. They don't know Dan Diaz, they know Brittany Maynard.
So talk about what that journey is like. You go into a state and you try to find time with legislators to tell your story, Brittany's story. How was that received?
I certainly will get their attention. They at least if they remember Brittany's story, or their staffers do. Just sharing her picture, that image from People Magazine. A lot of times they'll say, "Oh, I remember this. Yeah, hold on," and they'll go and speak to the elected official and say, "Just give this guy a few minutes." So her story continues to resonate. It's incredibly powerful, and you know, it's frustrating at times, especially at the federal level, with just, and I'll use this, just the clown show of what some politicians are interested in, just being in front of a camera instead of improving the lives of the citizenry of their state, or you know, of the country. So, but I know when I'm talking to a caring legislator who is there to listen and to pass laws and work on legislation that will improve the lives of their constituents. So those moments are meaningful to me. But yes, it's tough when I'm trying to chase down a senator who, in some cases, is just, and I've had these conversations where they know they should vote for this. They're constituents, they're supportive, and yet they'll be like, "Well, I can't vote that way," even though privately they'll say, "Well, I can't vote that way because of the blowback I'm going to get from my caucus, or of the pressure I'm going to get from my priest." And I'm sitting there thinking, wait a minute. Like in California, I had a legislator say that to me. In California, an assembly member represents 500,000 people. A senator represents 1 million people. And there's a senator who tells me that he needs to talk to his priest about this. And I'm thinking, wait, that priest might be one of the people that you represent, but the other 999,000 in California support was 74%. So it's like, you need to represent them. And yet, unfortunately, they feel, well, no, I'm just going to listen to, from a religious perspective, I'm going to be opposed to this.
So let's talk about religious concerns about this. How do you address that? If I say my faith leader, my guide opposes this, how often are you successful in talking it through and winning them over?
I mean, I also shared that nationwide support amongst my biggest opponents, always the Catholic Church, again, which I'm a member of, support amongst Catholics nationwide is 70%. So while church leadership, they're officially opposed. Well, that's fine. They can have that opinion. The people who sit in the pews in the congregation, they agree with Brittany. So, and so from that perspective, and then, obviously there is, or there should be, our founding fathers, the idea, it was Jefferson, a wall of separation between matters of church and state. That unfortunately gets very little traction. They are so quick to disregard that. But the big thing that I emphasize is that the strength of this bill is that it's an option.
Yes.
So for a person like Brittany, who she's not Catholic, I was the more religious one, she's not. So if an individual, for whatever their religious beliefs are, that they think that they would never want to pursue this, well, then if they find themselves in Brittany's predicament, they simply never apply for it.
Yep.
But who's anybody? And these are Brittany's words in one of her videos. Who's anybody to think that they can tell Brittany, try to impose their beliefs on her?
Yeah.
So that sometimes will help move it along a little bit.
So another group that has concerns about right to die legislation is those in the disability community, and they worry that they may be vulnerable and that there could be malintent and try to kill people off with disabilities. How do you address that?
So I start by sharing several letters because we reach out to them. It's called Disability Rights Oregon. And from the executive director, we reach out for them on every so many years, and we ask them, have you heard anything yet? And I'll share these letters with you. And the answer is no, we still have not. This is the federally funded agency within the state of Oregon that is charged with investigating any sort of issues pertaining to a person being abused or coerced or utilizing medical aid and dying, or, broader than that. And the answer is we still have not received a single. Actually, the only complaints the Disability Rights Oregon has ever received is from disabled individuals who are concerned that they may not be able to participate and use medical aid in dying because they happen to have a disability that prevents them. The biggest safeguard is you have to be able to consume the medication on your own.
Yeah.
So it's the exact opposite. And so that's the frustrating part. Support amongst the disability rights community, we're actually have a majority of support from disabled individuals, because those individuals that are supportive, they recognize this has nothing to do with the disability. This has everything to do with being terminally ill.
Yes.
So being disabled does not qualify you for this. You would have to be terminally ill 6 months or less to live. And those individuals, they say, wait, if I was ever to find myself in that predicament, then I would want this option available to me too.
100%.
So those who show up, and with great respect, I understand where they're coming from. I get it.
Right.
Are disabled individuals marginalized and treated as second-rate citizens? Absolutely. And it would be so disingenuous for anybody to ignore that. But I submit, and the data shows, that for the first time, this legislation actually protects the most vulnerable in our society, because it forces the conversation. It makes that individual, regardless of disability status or not, elderly, whatever, have this conversation with their physician. And then a second physician has to agree that, yes, this person does qualify. But part of that process is the screening of it is to say, is there anybody who's asked you to talk to us? Is there anybody in your family we need to be concerned about? Are you here on your own free will?
Right.
So the danger to individuals that without this legislation is the abuse that the opponents say is going to occur. No, no, no. That's what's happening right now behind closed doors.
Right.
That's what occurs because there is no process that helps bring this out into the open.
So we're going to get to Maryland, but right now, how many states have right to die laws, and how many others have legislation pending this year?
When Brittany died, there were only 4 states. We are now up to 11. Well, sorry, 10 states plus DC. So 11
Okay.
jurisdictions.
Okay.
And as far as, I mean, in any given year, I can share the other states that I'm working on this year: Maryland, Delaware, New York, Massachusetts, Minnesota. So there's probably legislation in another 10.
Right.
But this year, there's probably 5 or 6 key target ones, Maryland being one that I'm
Okay.
focused on.
So let's talk about Maryland. And
All
just
right.
for the record, I mean, if it's not obvious by having this conversation, I am a huge supporter and a proud co-sponsor. And I just think it's such an enormously important issue. So several years ago, the House passed a bill. It came to the Senate, and devastating. It failed on a tie vote, 23 to 23, with one of my colleagues abstaining, was on the floor and didn't vote, which is against Senate rules. He was really struggling, and he just thought he would decide not to vote. And so the bill failed. Now, the reality is that Governor Hogan likely would have vetoed the bill. So now we have Governor Westmore, who supports the bill. And we have a lot of support in the Senate and House. So why don't you talk about the way you see Maryland right now?
Well, those items that you mentioned are key. We have, based off of the vote counts, and that's what this all comes down to. And every state I've been to is, all right, how many?
Yeah.
That big board that's up on the screen, how many green lights, or however it's run. So in both chambers, in both the House and in the Senate, we feel that we have the votes necessary to get through. And since from at the executive level, from the governor, that he's already voiced his support for this. So in so many states, what this comes down to is just focus, specifically from leadership. That's where things, and so many times where it's like, oh, we're looking good. We have, if we have leadership on board, then the focus will be put on it. And by the end of that session, they're like, you know what, these are the bills. Because, and Senator, I feel I understand how things go. You're in session, things get crazy. By the end of session, it's like, how many of these can we actually get across the finish line? You focus on these, the others, well, we'll get to those next time, next session. And with medical aid and dying, it seems like that is a recurring theme. And the unfortunate part is that there are terminally ill individuals in Maryland. They don't have the luxury of waiting for some politician to say, oh, okay, this year I think we'll do it. Those people, they have, they're like Brittany at end of life. You don't have that luxury. So Maryland looks good. My efforts now, after visiting there, being there this past week, continues, and reaching out to just help bring focus and make sure that this bill, by the end of the session, is one that collectively the elected officials are saying, this is one that we need to move through this year. It's time. This bill is one of the ones we can't leave it behind.
So does press attention help, or does that add to a challenge? Does it motivate the opponents, or does it inspire the supporters?
It does both, but I have to say I've learned, for me, this is kind of a three-pronged thing. One is kind of the grassroots, and Brittany's story helps with that. People, the citizens of Maryland have to understand what this bill is. The protections in place, so that's part of it. Well, how do we get to them? That's the media attention. So yes, we have to, and I hate that. I do not. I'm an introvert. So is Brittany. So that part of it, it's out of my comfort zone, but I'll do it because I know it makes a difference. I was on the Dr. Phil show like 2 months ago. I'm like, all right, I guess, sure, I'll go.
Right.
But my effort, and then the last one being the elected officials, winning hearts and minds and sharing the reality of what this means to a terminally ill individual in Maryland. That, and as far as the opponents, like I said, with 71% support in Maryland, the opponents, they're certainly very vocal, but a lot of times they're misrepresenting this. They'll use terms like euthanasia and suicide. That has nothing to do with this. But there comes a point where, I mean, you almost have to say, well done. I mean, they scare the hell out of people.
Yeah.
But along the way, this is the frustrating part. They do not offer an alternative, a remedy, an option for somebody like Brittany.
Right.
And I've challenged them. I'm like, well, give me something. What did we miss?
Yeah.
What do you offer her so she does not have to endure being tortured to death by that brain tumor?
Right.
Silence. And I'm like, well, as a result, then that's why I'm working on this bill, because
Right.
the protections in place, this is sound legislation. We have over 40 years of data from all the states that proves that.
So I have just a few more questions before we start to wrap up and do our fast five.
Okay.
Give us soundbite right here. Pitch the issue. Why should people support end of life options, death with dignity? Briefly.
End of life option legislation, it does not result in more people dying. It simply results in fewer people suffering.
I love that. That is perfect. That's
what this whole thing is about. That's it.
And data has shown that there's a comfort level, a psychological comfort that I have the option. I may never take the pills, but knowing that I could provides comfort to the patient and the family.
Sure.
What is your biggest frustration on working this issue, and what is your proudest specific accomplishment?
The biggest frustration, I think, is I already alluded to when I talked to a legislator, and I've had plenty, some staunch conservatives, you know, that they public or privately share with me. They're like, I actually support this. They had a conversation with their wife just last week. We're on board. We would want this option for ourselves, and they know it's the right thing. And yet, and I'm sitting there going, huh, let's contrast these two things. Here we have Brittany, a 29-year-old, she's not a public servant, but she's fighting for terminally ill individuals. I would say more so than that elected official whose role is to do what's right for his constituents. And yet, even though he personally knows that this is good legislation, he just won't, he or she, because it's happened in many different places, they just won't, you know, stand up for it and say, and they could do it quietly and just say, I support this for these reasons, and move it forward. So that's been the frustration. The proudest moments, I mean, every state that we've passed, I went, the governor of New Jersey invited me to the bill signing there. But when we passed it in California, I would say that was a big one for me, just because
Of course.
that was Brittany's, you know, her main goal was, why did we have to leave our own home state? So for me, California was a big win in 2015.
Yeah. Deep breath. Thank you. Thank you for all you do. I'm going to totally shift to do a fast five, because I want people to know a little bit more about you. And so, as an extraordinary human and as a thoughtful leader and a caring husband, but let's do 5 quick questions with quick answers. So what is your favorite inspirational quote? Something that guides you, inspires you?
The things that you do for yourself are gone when you are gone. But the things you do for other people, that's what lives on as your legacy. So for me, Brittany's legacy was just the selflessness that even while she was dying, she decided that she would use some of that precious time that she had left during the last couple of months of her life to try to advocate for this.
Yes.
So, yeah, her legacy, her impact on this topic, this conversation is significant.
Okay. What hobby or hobbies do you enjoy that take you away from advocacy? Give you some time off.
I do enjoy travel to, you know, just road trips here in California. I'll go to San Diego. We have friends and family in Miami, so I guess warm places. So travel I like. Beyond that, I mean, he's over there right now, but the dog hanging out with our four-legged companions. It's amazing how much support that we get from so Charlie is that little dog that's in the photo with Brittany. He weighed 10 pounds in that photo. He's now 130 pounds.
Oh my
Maintained. So he's
wow.
So yeah, simple things like that. Brittany and I were pretty simple and entertained by those types of things. Travel, being at home, it's fine.
Question 3. What is your all-time favorite movie?
Huh. I do kind of like I like Forrest Gump. I read the book. The book's not the book and the movie are totally different. Shawshank Redemption. There's another one that talking about a disciplined or a just determined individual making a difference in a sense. So
good.
yeah, those two.
So with your advocacy, there are always tears and sorrow and memories. What is something that reliably makes you laugh?
Well, that's easy. I just think of all of the good times with Brittany. So it could be, our wedding day, a birthday, a vacation that she and I took together. I mean, she just silly and fun and goofy. We were those things with one another, and so it's real easy to get back into that mindset by just remembering any of those moments.
Good. Question number 5, Dan Diaz. Compassion and Choices, Brittany Maynard's husband, loving husband. What is your hidden secret superpower? What is a skill or talent you have, something you're really good at that most folks can't do?
Well, it was stuff that at times Brittany I'm pretty stuff around the house, fixing stuff, whether it's structural, electrical, plumbing. I'll tackle whatever issue it is and improve it, make it better.
Nice.
I kind of also like, there's some therapy in it for me. I like working with my hands. So, I mean, I've had friends who they'll say, hey, come over for dinner. There's a dinner party, literally. I'm like, okay, what time? They'll say, well, it starts at 6. But could you get here at 4? Oh, and bring your tools. And before the dinner party, I'm literally installing their dishwasher. I'm like, yeah, okay, fine. I'll do that.
That's hilarious. So, I was just thinking, when are you coming to Rockville?
Right.
Well, Dan, you are a remarkable person, and I'm so glad we have the opportunity to chat. I hope this video will be seen because it's been a long time now, and an increasingly long time since Brittany's death on November 1st, 2014. So we've got to continue to keep her alive, her story alive, her passion for living, and your passion for passing laws in other states in her memory. So thank you for all you do, and I look forward to seeing you in person again soon.
Thank you.